This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play War Room. War Room was released in 2019 by Nightingale Games and designed by Larry Harris Jr. This game supports up to 6 players and takes up to 6 hours or more to play. Welcome back to the Harsh Rules breakdown for War Room by Nightingale Games. Picking up right where we left off in the last episode, we're going to begin with Phase 5, Refit and Deploy. Then work our way through Phase 6, Morale, and end with Phase 7, Production. We've still got a lot to learn, so let's get started. In Phase 5, Refit and Deploy, players return their air units to friendly territories, complete construction of new units, and organize their commands. This phase is completed in 3 steps. In Step 1, Land Air Commands, all air commands that were moved and/or participated in combat should have been marked with an arrow tag. Those arrow tags are a reminder to move air commands during this phase. All tagged air commands may now move up to 2 regions and must land in a friendly territory. Eligible friendly territories to land in also include those that are currently embattled. Once these units have been moved to a friendly landing space, remove their arrow tags. If no friendly territories are available for an air command to land, then those units are immediately eliminated. Also remember that air commands by themselves may never take control of an enemy territory after a battle, even if no enemy forces are present. Air commands may also be split at this time, thereby allowing units to land in multiple territories. During this step, also remove all carrier fighter tokens from the world map. Step 2, Deploy Units, is skipped on the first round of play as production has not yet occurred. However, in subsequent turns, players conduct this step simultaneously. First, players remove industry tokens from newly constructed units. Next, they may create new command stacks if they have command tokens, or add these units to existing command stacks. Be aware though, there is a limit of 8 units per command stack. Land or air units must be deployed to the territory in which they were constructed, even if the territory is embattled. Naval units must be deployed to a port-connected sea region even if the sea region is embattled or only enemy units are present. Also remember that bombed infrastructure affects deployment limits. Excess units unable to deploy due to newly bombed industries with a reduced smokestack limit are destroyed. The owners choose which ones, and those units are transferred to the casualty list. Finally, if sufficient command tokens are not available to accommodate all the deployed units, even after merging to free some up, then excess units are destroyed but not moved to the casualty list. Once again, the units to be destroyed are at the player's discretion. Finally, Step 3 is another opportunity to organize commands. Players may use mergers and splits to reconfigure their units. However, no command stack may exceed 8 units. But there is no limit to the number of commands in any region. New commands may be created as long as command tokens are available. Following numerous battles, players may have accumulated several unit casualties, stress tokens, and medals. In Phase 6 Morale, all of these elements will be accounted for, and each nation's homeland status will be evaluated. First, each nation must calculate their stress from casualties. Multiply each unit type by the values at the top of the casualty area. Those casualty points are then totaled and compared to the conversion chart at the top of the morale board. Each nation takes stress tokens for this conversion and places them on their newspaper spaces next to their national flag. Once these calculations are made and all stress tokens are placed, resolve the following steps for each nation in turn order. In the first step, players will have an opportunity to cancel stress points. Each nation may give up any combination of metals and/or civilian goods to cancel stress points at a rate of 1 metal or 1 civilian good per stress point. If a player chooses not to spend metals or civilian goods, they may be kept indefinitely for later use. Keep in mind that stress points, metals, and civilian goods may never be traded among nations. Once this is completed, the nation will evaluate their stress level. If a nation now has stress points equal to or more than their stress threshold, move that nation's flag up to the next zone on the Homeland status track. Only remove stress tokens equal to that nation's stress threshold, leaving leftover stress tokens on the newspaper space. Repeat this process until any stress points remaining are less than the threshold. Therefore, a nation might move up more than one zone per round. If a nation has fallen into the gray zone, the lowest level on the Homeland status track, do not return any stress tokens to storage. In the next step, the nation has an opportunity to repair their Homeland status. Each nation has the option to give up any combination of its metals and/or civilian goods equal to its stress threshold value to slide back one zone on the Homeland status track. A nation can't go below the starting white zone nor slide back more than one zone per round. This is an official revision from Nightingale Games. The original rule allowed players to spend 5 metals or civilian goods. The latest copy of these rules with revisions can be found on the Nightingale Games website. In the final step, the nation applies their stress zone penalties from their Homeland status. Stress penalties are cumulative and recur each round. Now, let's walk through each of these stress penalties to gain a better understanding of their impact. Using the US Jumbo flag as an example, let's walk through each of the Homeland status's penalty zones. The white zone is for acceptable stress. This is the starting position, and there are no penalties if a nation's jumbo flag is in this zone. The first time a nation exceeds their stress threshold, they decline to the blue zone. In the blue zone, the nation suffers labor and civil unrest. They must pay 3 resources, if they're able to, in order to restore order in the homeland. Below this is the yellow zone, for dysfunctional rails and ports. All rails controlled by a nation, including rails in captured enemy territories, are not usable by that nation or any ally. The affected nation may still use an ally's rails if that ally's nation has not reached this zone. As for dysfunctional ports, no trade by sea is allowed, and ports controlled by the nation no longer provide port advantage. However, deployment from a port may still occur. The zone below this is the orange zone for disrupted supply lines. Due to depleted morale and disorganization at the front, the nation has 3 fewer orders to write during Phase 2, Strategic Planning. To record this, draw slashes through the last 3 boxes of the nation's O&P chart. When a nation falls into the red zone, things are starting to get really bad with economic collapse. In this zone, no new resources may be added to the nation's resource chart. Current resources may still be spent or lost. And a nation has hit rock bottom when they enter the gray zone, mass desertion. The nation's player must now transfer to the casualty list a number of its units of any type from the world map equal to its current stress points. And the stress points do not get removed for such desertions. A quick note. After resolving the gray zone penalties, if an embattled territory loses its last defending land unit, the territory control is not lost to the enemy until the combat phase of the following round. A battle against a garrison force will take place if no defending units are present. Remember, each of these zones is cumulative. This means that a nation will suffer penalties from the zone their flag currently inhabits, as well as all the penalties from previous zones. And while nations can spend metals and civilian goods to repair their homeland status, a nation can only slide back one zone per round. Keep this in mind when formulating your strategies during the game. Phase 7 is the production phase. In this phase, players will select new units to order into production and pay for them with resources they've earned. Transactions are recorded in the player's O&P chart book, the nation's little black book. This phase is completed in 4 steps. In step 1, players will mark their starting resources. In this step, each player references their resource chart and fills in the initial resources box in the bottom left-hand corner of the O&P sheet. Put the oil, iron, and OSR resource totals in the top 3 boxes. Then in step 2, players may trade with neutral nations for resources. The results of these trades are recorded in the next row of boxes. Resource trades can only be conducted with neutral nations, not other players. Let's pause for a moment to see how this works. In step 2 of phase 7 production, players may initiate one trade with a non-embattled neutral nation. A quick note, remember China may not trade at all. Trades may be conducted by land or sea if they meet the following requirements. First, for a trade by land, that nation or an ally of that nation must control an adjacent, non-embattled territory to the neutral nation with resources to trade. For a sea trade, the neutral nation's sea region port must be free of all enemy commands. The Axis have an additional requirement. They must have a command in that neutral nation's sea region, basically for intimidation. Neutral nations with trading ability will have an icon of the resource they have available. Neutral nations come in 2 types, standard neutrals and pro-allied neutrals. Standard neutrals will trade with either side until captured, then only with its captors. Pro-allied neutrals will only trade with allies. Unless they've been captured by the Axis, then they will only trade with them. Neutral nations will not trade for resources they already have. They will only trade for the other 2 resources at a set exchange rate. For example, when trading with Colombia that only has OSR resources to trade, a player nation can trade 2 oil for 5 OSR or 3 iron for 5 OSR. For tracking purposes, all trades must be declared and the route verified. Then the trading nation adjusts its resource track accordingly and writes the exchange and new resource totals on its O&P chart. Remember, each nation is restricted to 1 trade per round total. Now let's continue with step 2, note purchase of units. In this step, nations simultaneously decide the number of units planned for military production. To do this, players use the military production order form on the right side of the sheet. They will transfer the resources plus or minus any trades to the top of this sheet. Units available to purchase are shown in the far left column. A player writes in the number of units they wish to purchase in the space to the right of the unit. The remaining columns shows the cost in resources per unit with colored dots. Each colored dot represents a resource of that type. Next to this is a space to record the total cost of each resource type. For example, if the US player decided to order 2 fighters, it would cost them 4 oil resources, 2 units times a cost of 2, 2 iron resources, and 2 OSR. The total purchase for all units to produce is then summed at the bottom of the form. These totals are subtracted from the resource numbers we wrote in at the top of this form. The remaining resources are then written in at the bottom of the form. These figures will be used to update the pins on the resource chart. One final note on unit orders. You may have noticed a crate symbol in the top row for items to purchase. These are civilian goods tokens. Civilian goods can be used to cancel out stress markers on a 1-to-1 basis. They may be purchased at this time for a cost of 5 resources of any type. Keep this in mind if you plan on absorbing a lot of stress in the next game round. Next is step 3, review purchases and update resources. After all nations have finished writing their purchases, each nation confirms validity with an opponent by exchanging O&P charts. Then all nations gather units purchased from storage trays and update their resource charts simultaneously. Finally, it's time for step 4, transfer new units to industries. Nations in turn order now place purchase units on the world map in a controlled industrial territory. This includes embattled territories or ones captured from an enemy nation. Remember, industrial territories have factory icons with smokestacks. Each smokestack allows the production of one unit in that territory. Units placed in territories are considered to be under construction. Within each territory, keep all of these units in one stack regardless of unit type, whether they're land, air, or naval unit. The normal stack limit of 8 does not apply to units under construction. Then, cap each stack of new units with an industry token. An opponent should verify the smokestack limits, as the number of units that may be constructed in each industrial territory is limited to its strategic value, reduced by the number of bomb tokens present in it. Also, naval units may only be constructed in territories that have a port. Do not deploy naval units to the sea until Phase 5, Refit and Deploy. Until then, keep them in the same stack as the other units under construction beneath the industry token. Remember, new units under construction may not be ordered nor attacked, but are prone to strategic bombing raids and being captured. Civilian goods are not limited by smokestacks or linked to any industrial territory. When purchased, they should be placed immediately on the morale board next to the respective flag in the metals column. Before we move to the next phase, let's discuss how production works in China. China is not an industrialized nation at this time, and therefore can only mobilize the local populace as infantry. Each starting Chinese territory has a special mobilization icon above its region ID. Due to these limitations, China must deploy newly purchased infantry immediately in one or more Chinese-controlled territories marked with this icon. The number of infantry deployed in each territory is limited by its strategic value. The only other unit that China can produce in this time period is artillery. However, to produce artillery units, they will need an industrial territory. Therefore, China must control Peiping to produce these units. Keep these rules in mind when playing as China during the production phase. Following Phase 7, and before starting a new game round, it's time to check for victory. An alliance has won the war if it has captured a certain number of capital territories. In the global scenario, if the Axis simultaneously control 2 out of 3 allied capitals, they win the war. If the Allies simultaneously control both Axis capitals, they win the war. If both sides meet the victory requirements in the same round, continue the war until that is no longer the case. In the rare event that all nations have no units on the map, then both sides lose. At the end of a game round, it is also time to check for any collapsed nations. A collapsed nation has no units on the world map, and its homeland status is in the gray zone. Once collapsed, that nation no longer has an economy. Remove its resource chart and any remaining resources are lost. Keep any national flags on the world map until those territories are claimed by other nations. If an ally already occupies such a territory with any units, regardless of embattled status, it must now claim the territory card and place its own national flag, gaining any resource income in future rounds. If alliance members disagree on ownership, use turn order rank as a decider. If only enemy units occupy a collapsed nation's territory, then those nations must wait until the battle debrief of the next round to claim it in the normal manner. There also will be no defensive garrison force. Empty territories of a collapsed nation may only be claimed once occupied by units in future rounds. Award a medal, 3 if the capital, each time a nation, friendly or not, claims a collapsed nation's territory. Once a nation collapses, permanently flip all territory cards showing its flag to the embattled side. Now that we've covered all the game phases, let's take a closer look at some specific rules for War Room, beginning with neutral nations. In the first episode of this rules breakdown series, we discuss neutral nations. These nations have decided to sit out the war and can be classified in 2 types: standard neutrals that don't have an affiliation to either side in the conflict, and pro-allied neutrals which are sympathetic to the Allies. Each of these nations have a standing army or at least a garrison force and may have resources to trade with players. I covered trading with neutrals for resources earlier in this episode. So next, let's discuss the ramifications for invading a neutral nation. Neutral nations can be invaded in Phase 3 movement operations. When units from either alliance enter a standard neutral for the first time, the act of invasion shifts that neutral nation to an alliance in opposition to the invader. For example, if Germany invades a standard neutral like Spain, they will join the Allies. A member of that alliance will then take control of the invaded neutral nation. The alliance member with the nearest land command to the neutral nation assumes control. If there are multiple nations within the same range, use turn order to decide who takes control. That nation's player will place its flag in the neutral territory and claim its territory card. They will then place any of that nation's defense forces without a command token and an active hotspot marker as a reminder to resolve combat in Phase 4. A quick note. Air units passing over a neutral nation will not trigger an alignment shift nor activate defense forces, despite it being an act of aggression. Let's look at a quick example of this for Spain. A German land command has just moved into Spain. This invasion shifts Spain from a standard neutral to an allied territory. The allied member who assumes control of Spain is decided by the player with the nearest land command to the territory. In this case, it's the British 32nd Land Command in Gibraltar. Therefore, the British player places their flag and adds the territory card to their card holder. That player also places Spain's defense force without any command tokens for the first battle and adds a hotspot marker to resolve that battle in the next phase. Then in Phase 4 combat operations, the invading force and the new owner of the neutral nation will fight their first battle. Eliminated units from this first battle are removed to storage and not recorded as casualties. If the neutral nation survives the invasion, any remaining defense force units will be incorporated into the new owner's command tokens. Once this occurs, that nation will control the territory for the remainder of the game. Units eliminated in subsequent battles will then be counted as casualties for that nation. Ownership of the defense force or the territory may not be transferred amongst alliance members. While the Axis and allied nations are collectively in direct opposition to each other, Japan on the Axis side and the Soviet Union on the Allied side must still abide by an earlier non-aggression pact between them. The member that breaks this pact will suffer a serious blow to morale with a 6-point stress penalty. Also, breaking the pact is so severe that it nullifies medal achievement when capturing territories from the ex-pact member for an entire round. The rules regarding the Soviet-Japanese non-aggression pact can be found on page 23 of the rulebook, outlined in 5 articles. I'm going to summarize those articles here to give you a basic understanding of the pact's parameters. Article 1 identifies the pact members and establishes their agreement. This article states that the Soviet Union and Japan may not enter or fly through each other's territories. Article 2 refers to the pact members' allies. Allies may not use a friendly pact member's territory to enter or fly through an enemy pact member's territory. For example, the United States may not attack a Japanese-controlled territory from a Soviet-controlled territory. If they want to attack Japan, they must do it from their own or another ally's territory. Article 3 is regarding sea regions and territories. Pact members may coexist in a region without triggering combat. In conflicts containing multiple nations, divide up these battles to exclude pact members. Article 4 is regarding third-party territory occupation with a pact member present. So this could be a continuation of Article 3. So let's say the Japanese took over a US territory that had a few Soviet troops in it. The Soviet troops were excluded from the battle between the US and the Japanese, per the last article. Now that the territory is controlled by the Japanese, the Soviets must leave the territory by the next round. Per Article 4, Pact members cannot pin each other. However, enemy units will pin if able. Therefore, from the start of Phase 4, failure to leave the territory will eliminate any offending units. These units are then transferred to the casualty list. Refusal to comply will result in the pact being broken. Finally, Article 5 lists penalties for breaking the pact. First, the breaching pact member will gain 6 stress, and no medals for capturing territories from ex-pact members for an entire round. Be aware an ally may not break the pact without permission from the pact member. Upon agreement, that pact member assumes all penalties. And now that we've covered the Soviet-Japanese non-aggression pact, you should be ready to begin your own game of War Room. Before we close out this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.